Chapter 5 Mount Blue. He sat back narrow-eyed, still and unmoving, the man known as Mac, huge, unsmiling, grim, scarred, armed and lethal. She'd realized who he was from the moment he'd whipped off her hood. Patient number 9's image of Mac had been that of a strong man with scars, but no details. That hadn't mattered at all. What Mac looked like made no difference. It was just externals. What mattered was him, the essence of him, and in that, 9 had been incredibly clear. Strong, hard, unyielding, fiercely loyal, honest, just. A hard man, a tough enemy, no better friend. She'd been almost certain before, but after touching him, all doubt evaporated. Everything 9 had communicated about Mac had been clear in the man she touched. She'd recognized it all instantly, like hearing the exact same chord of music heard the previous day. If he'd been in color, it would have been the exact same hue. There was violence in him too, though, and again she questioned her sanity in tracking this man down. She'd been compelled, that was true, but maybe she could have stopped herself somehow, locked herself in her house and thrown the key out the window, gone to the airport and taken the first flight out of the country, one way, got herself arrested. No. Her shoulders slumped just a little, then she straightened them. There was no force on earth that could have stopped her in her quest. She'd almost died in the car, and maybe she'd die here, in this quiet room somewhere, wherever it was. But nothing could have kept her away. Even now, the echoes of the compulsion she felt stirred in her blood. The man's huge hands uncurled. The movement you'd make before reaching for something. Possibly that big black gun strapped to his right thigh. The violence in the man sitting across from her was very real. She knew that loyalty burned bright in him, but it wasn't loyalty to her. She watched him carefully, but she knew that if he decided to move against her, she could never be fast enough, strong enough to prevail. He could crush her head with one blow of those enormous hands. It's pointless insisting you're not Mac, she said quietly. Ah! The noise came from deep in his chest. His huge hand lifted and swept the air. She recognized it as a gesture of frustration 1 second too late. She flinched, bringing her arm up to shield her head. It was irresistible, unstoppable. Her heart had pumped out the blood in one liquid flash as her body flooded with panic. By the time she recognized that he'd punched nothing but air, she was hunkered down in the chair, instinctively trying to present as small a target as possible. He growled. There was no other word for it, a low sound of disgust deep in that barrel chest. She straightened slowly, trying to find enough air to say sorry, heart still pounding from the aftermath of blinding terror. I'm not going to hit you. I don't hurt women. He said each word clearly, and they fell like rocks from his mouth, as if each one hurt. And in a flash, Catherine understood. She had no idea whether the understanding came from some deep-seated emotion in him she'd felt on touching him and hadn't had time to analyze, or whether it came from old-fashioned insight, but she touched some hidden nerve in him, crossed an invisible but very real line. Still, he looked so incredibly frightening. His size alone was enough to make you shrink back. Coupled with his scarred face and the smashed nose, he looked like someone you'd be terrified to meet in a dark alley. Most people would instinctively react to him in fear, drawing back without knowing anything about him. Though there had been the violence she'd sensed in him, dark swirls of it, and he'd killed, the violence was controlled by iron clamps. He wasn't a man to lose control. He wasn't a man to hurt the weak. I know that, she said gently, straightening up. She felt more than saw him relax a tiny bit. I'm sorry I flinched. It was an instinctive reaction. I should have known better. You haven't hurt me up to now, and she looked down at the tabletop, wondering if she could say it. She looked up into hard, dark eyes. When I touched you, I felt it, that you don't hurt women or children. Felt it very strongly, so I really don't have an excuse. She blew out a breath, opened her hand, the hand that had touched him, none at all. When she touched him, he'd been so easy to read. Unlike most people, he didn't have layer upon layer of self-serving nonsense, of hypocrisy, of self-indulgence, and a total and utter lack of self-knowledge. He knew himself inside out. His emotions had been clean, clear, even pure, even the dark ones. Nothing sick or psychotic at all. She hoped. Catherine was flying on nothing but a wing and a prayer here. The gift she'd fought all her life, and that had reared up and bit her in the backside with patient 9 was still a mystery to her. Could she trust it? Because the truth was, she was locked up here with no idea at all of what here was. She was this man's prisoner. There were other people here, she was sure. If they were his people. No one was going to rescue her. No one even knew where she was. She didn't even know where she was. Even if she had a working cell phone, which she did not, and she had someone to call for help, which she didn't know where she was. She was his prisoner, and she had to take it on faith in her despised gift, that he wasn't going to hurt her, wasn't going to kill her. He nodded once, dark eyes on her, and stood up abruptly. Come, he said, and walked toward the door. Startled, Catherine rose and followed him. Just when she thought he'd smash his already smashed nose against the door, it whooshed open, and she walked out of the room, following those broad shoulders, and stared. The change in the air crossing the threshold had been like crossing from night into day. The air became cooler, fresher, with the slight tang of oxygen and the scent of a forest. They were on a corridor a couple of stories high, overlooking a huge atrium. She grabbed hold of the top rung of the balcony and leaned forward. It was such an extraordinary sight, she had trouble processing what she was seeing. A huge vault with twinkling lights like stars. It took her a second or two to realize the lights were evenly spaced and artificial. The vault was transparent like glass. Only no glass she knew of could cover such a space and still keep the cold out. Down below, 2 stories down, was a richness of glossy green plants, crisscrossed by pathways, small lights threaded through the branches of trees in squat cylinders with glowing tops at 5-foot intervals providing light. It looked like a fairyland. A couple of people were walking the paths. Otherwise, the area, as large as a mall parking lot, was deserted. But then again, it must have been well past midnight. One guy 2 stories down was pushing a hand truck with boxes on it. He happened to look up, give a 2-fingered salute off his forehead, then disappeared into the greenery. It's beautiful, she breathed and looked sharply up at Mac. It was beautiful, but it was also hidden, as he wanted to remain hidden. It was a town, only a town turned inward, not outward. tucked away, mysterious, remote. Man, he was so going to zap her memories. This secret community was going to be MIB'd away forever, and she was sorry for that because it was the most interesting place she'd ever seen. A huge domed space with a lush park along the bottom, plants twining around the balconies, ringing the area. Doors opened off the balconies. She had no idea if the rooms behind the doors were occupied or not. So far, she'd seen exactly 3 people here, but what she saw was well-designed, well-tended, pristine. Someone had to do that. 2 more people walked along a path, a man and a woman. The man looked up, did a little double take at seeing her, then waved to Mac. He gravely dipped his head. They walked off, heads together, discussing something earnestly. This was a community. People lived here, worked here. It was gorgeous and hidden and unlike anything she'd ever seen before. The huge black arching dome with the twinkling lights, the intense greenery, the curving balconies looking a little like the New York Guggenheim. So beautiful, she repeated in a whisper. To her surprise, he answered her. Yeah. His big hands clutched the railing so hard the knuckles turned white, then lifted. We want to keep it that way. He turned his head to her, looked penetrating and hostile. Where are we, and what is this place? She lifted her hands, palms out, the universal sign of surrender. No threat, no weapons. You're going to MIB me anyway. Why not let me know where I am? There are obviously other people around. It's so well cared for, so well planned. Down there, it looks like a park, and all these doors. People live here, work here, cook here. That meal was hands down one of the best I've ever had. If that's the way you feed your prisoners, I'd love to know how you treat your citizens. You'd be surprised who the cook is. Her eyes widened. It was the first thing he'd said to her that wasn't a question or a threat. For a second, she thought she saw astonishment on his face, too, that he'd talked to her openly. But then she wouldn't remember any of this. She was going to have her brain zapped, poof, gone. She wouldn't miss the memory of sitting in her freezing car waiting for death and being scared nearly out of her wits that the huge man with the black ski mask rapping on her window. But the interrogation, she could admit to herself now how much Mac fascinated her. And this huge, gorgeous space under the dome, unlike anything she'd ever seen before, she was sorry that would have to go. It had all been such a surprise. The name of the talented cook would be nothing in comparison. Try me. You might have heard of her. Stella Cummings. Catherine's jaw dropped. Oh my gosh, Stella Cummings, the actress? He'd taken her utterly by surprise. Stella Cummings had been a child actor who'd won an Oscar at 15 and another one at 30. She'd been attacked by a stalker and had disappeared from view completely. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed her whole. Online tabloids had an entire "Where is Stella Cummings" industry going. I don't suppose this was so stupid. For all she knew, she was going to be killed soon, and yet here she was, morphing into fangirl. I loved her in Dangerous Tides. If she's around, could I meet her? If she doesn't want to talk about acting, I can compliment her on her taco. It was great. Let's go. He took her elbow and started walking. Startled, she had to trot to keep up with his huge strides. Where are we going? Am I going to get to meet Stella Cummings? No. His jaws clenched. Maybe tomorrow. Right now, I'm taking you to your room. He shut up after that, and she couldn't pry another word out of him. Questions were useless, and after a few minutes it took all of her breath to keep up with him. They circled the huge base until they were on the opposite side from the interrogation room, and went down a story. He stopped in front of a door and touched a part of the wall that had no distinguishing characteristics, no buttons, no panel, nothing. But when he tapped a specific spot, the door whooshed open. He gestured with his hand, and she moved toward the threshold, gingerly, heart pounding. For just a second back there, she'd had the impression that he was, well, not softening toward her, but at least not hugely hostile, and she thought maybe they could sit down and talk things over now that she'd read him. But no, he was ushering her into a dark prison cell. 4 walls, no windows, only blackness. She walked in slowly, giving a quick glance back at the door. No internal handle, no way out. A prison. A check of his dark eyes confirmed that. Nobody on earth knew where she was, and her lonely life was such that no one would think of looking for her. Maybe she was going to be left in this room to die. It wouldn't take much. Just leave her here until she rotted. No one to know, no one to care. Just one woman in a closed room, forgotten. Time passing. Dying, locked up, alone, weaker and weaker until the darkness closed in. Her throat tightened, her chest couldn't move. He stepped behind her, that huge body almost pressing against hers, a huge force pushing air ahead, forcing her to stumble another step inside, farther from the door, farther from the light of the corridor. She gasped in a breath. Another, I can't do this, she thought. All her resources were gone. She was exhausted and terrified. A drumbeat of terror in her head. A dark tide up it, lapping higher and higher. Soon she would drown in it. She stumbled another step forward, then turned, craning her head a little to look Mac in the face. She could barely make out his features in the backwash of light from the doorway. She had to know, had to. Was she going to be closed up here and left to die? May I touch you? She gasped. There was barely enough light to see his frown, his head jerking back in astonishment. Without waiting for an answer, she reached for his hand, clasping it in hers. Heat. That was the first thing she perceived. His huge hand was hot, as if he were a radiator himself. Her own hands were chilled, and the heat of his simply sank into her, through the skin, sank deep into muscle, and then, she let his hand drop, missing the connection, the heat immediately. No use clinging to him, to a man who distrusted her, who considered her a threat, but who wasn't going to kill her. That had come through loud and strong. This wasn't going to be a permanent prison. However long she was going to be locked up, it wasn't going to be forever. Or so she hoped. Without a word, he stepped back beyond the threshold. The door whooshed closed, and the room lit up. There was no specific source of light, no lamps and no fixtures, just light. The room was comfortably furnished, large and spacious. It had seemed sinister in the darkness, but now that it was lit, it was just an ordinary room, larger than most hotel rooms, with a queen-size bed, a sitting area with 2 armchairs, a desk doubling as a table. A quick glance into the room beyond a door showed a very nice bathroom, stocked, she could see, with a tall stack of blindingly white towels, a bar of soap, and a brand new ultrasound toothbrush. Okay, a Hilton-level prison. She could do that. To her surprise, she found the small bag she'd packed, just in case her quest required an overnight stay. She'd had her small cosmetics case, a nightgown, slippers. The shower made her feel better, more human. She'd been on the road and on the run for almost 24 hours. She crawled into bed and stared at the ceiling. Everything ached, everywhere, inside and out, her body and her head and her heart. A wave of loneliness washed over her. Touching Mac had reassured her that he wasn't dangerous to her, not in the sense that she feared, but what did she know? Could she be sure? Her gift was so unreliable. Maybe she should have cultivated it instead of pushing it away with both hands, forcing it back into the deepest corners of her mind, like a nasty, broken, misshapen twin of herself. The gift had never been wrong, though it had so often been incomplete. Discerning top notes, the emotions of the moment, utterly missing crucial underlying emotions because she didn't want to explore, couldn't stand delving into the truth of people. So she often got people wrong because she hadn't been able to discern tones and shadows underneath and the strongest emotions. Mac might not be planning her death, but he had no particular incentive to keep her safe either, and yet there'd been something there, something elusive, some faintest feather tickling her mind like a gentle finger touching her. It felt like safety. Was it real? Probably not. Why should this man care in any way for her? Anyone she'd ever dated considered her a freak. And sex, well, that never worked out well. She was tired beyond today's stressful events. Tired of being who she was, tired of being pushed and pulled by things inside her she had no control over. Tired of knowing things she shouldn't. Tired. The lights went suddenly out and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. January 7th. Maybe I should just keep her locked up until she starves to death, Max said sourly the next morning. Nick and John didn't pay him any attention at all. They were riveted to the hawk emblem, John studying it carefully, then passing it on to Nick. John looked up briefly, white teeth flashing. Nah, I'll bet you've already sent Stella to bring her breakfast. Mac's teeth ground together, busted. Right now his prisoner was being tortured, lashed with the whip of the best breakfast ever cooked in the history of breakfasts. Nick didn't look up from the hawk. Wouldn't be efficient to kill her until we figure this thing out. Shit, John cocked his head as he stared at Nick. More than 10 words from Nick, all at once. I think that's a record, isn't it, Mac? Mac met John's eyes for a second. Nick had only been a team member for a week before the shit came down. He'd been introduced by Lucius, and damn, there it was again. That blow to the heart, as the 6th man after Randy Higgins had been lost in a halo jump. Parachute malfunction 2 miles up was unforgiving. Nick had quietly joined the team, doing exactly what he was told efficiently and well, without speaking more than a word or two at a time. None of the Ghost Ops teammates had a life he could or would talk about, but clues would come out. Mike Pelton's southern accent, John's California surfer dude drawl, Rolf Lundquist's love for skiing and intimate knowledge of the Rockies. Not Nick. He could have been hatched in a lab for all the clues he gave to his past. Fuck off, John, Nick said unexpectedly. It was so unusual for him to react that John blinked and shut up. Nick had been scrutinizing every molecule of the hawk. He finally placed it carefully down on the table and looked up, meeting John's eyes, then Mac's. It's real, and it's his. Mac nodded. He'd come to the same conclusion himself. Yeah, and so? John finally broke the silence. Surfer Dude didn't do too well with silence when they were off and on. Nick frowned. Expressions on his dark face were even rarer than words. John turned the emblem over in his hand. I mean, if this thing is real, then Lucius what? Gave it to the woman? Instead of lazing about in his villa on Capo Verde or Bali, he's in a lab in Palo Alto with his ass hanging out. Does that sound real? Is that even possible? I didn't know him like you two did. Never really had a chance to, so I don't know, but man, Nick was on a roll. Several sentences. Could it be we're wrong about him? You mean about what went down? Mac asked harshly. Nick nodded. Mac and John exchanged glances. John had been as devastated as Mac. Like Mac, he'd considered Lucius a surrogate father and had taken the betrayal hard. Nick had simply gone into stoic mode. The betrayal, one more shitty thing in a shitty world. It had brought Mac and John nearly to their knees. Mac? John asked, you think? Mac shook his head sharply. He didn't know. The betrayal had been bad enough. The idea that Lucius might have been betrayed himself, might be in serious danger. It depends on the woman. Nick seemed to be the only one who could think clearly about this. He turned to Mac. Look her like that? I think you should interrogate her more fully. And then, to Mac's astonishment, Nick grinned. It lasted just a second, and then Nick's features rearranged themselves into his usual stony facade, but it had been there. John picked up on it. Yeah, man, interrogate her. Get to the bottom of this. The front, too. He waggled his eyebrows. Hands-on interrogation, if you get my drift. Idiots, Mac growled. But he'd had a punch to the chest at the thought of putting his hands on her, damn it. That mass of shiny hair, the silver gray eyes and vulnerable expression blossomed in his head, and something stirred throughout his body, stirred south of the border too. Shit, he started getting a chubby and had to will it down. That shocked him. He was a focused man, all business, all the time. Sex had its place, a narrow enclosed space, usually barred to bed. Couple of hours max, then back to business. The woman was fucking with his head. He'd thought of her all night, damn it, and not in a strategic way. Nope. Not focusing on her story, pulling it this way and that, looking for holes, which is what he would have done with anyone else. All night, he'd stared at the ceiling, wide-eyed, remembering that burst of heat rushing through his veins at her touch. He'd never taken drugs. His entire childhood had been spent around people who retreated into drugs to wipe out their reality. He was 34, and he was sure that most of the people he'd known as a child were either dead or wished they were. So no, drugs had held no appeal. He didn't want to die. He wanted to live fiercely. He always had. But one kid had explained to him the rush of heroin as it hit the system. The kid rented his ass out on a nightly basis to get it, and hated himself 24/7. That 1 hour of heroin was worth it, worth the pain and degradation, worth being treated like butcher's meat, worth being beaten and abused every night. He'd said that when the drug entered him, all the bad things went away, and it was like being in heaven if heaven existed. Well, fuck it if that wasn't a pretty good explanation of what had happened when Dr. Catherine Young touched him. A rush like nothing he'd ever felt before, like having his heart stroked by gentle hands, like having his mind invaded by an angel. He wanted to snort angels. There were no angels in this world, and there was no other world. Angels didn't exist, and no one had stroked his heart. Not that he had one anyway. Damned if he understood what had happened, though. Something had. Something huge and scary. She'd pulled this stuff on him out of thin air. How had she done it? Maybe it was like those magicians on stage who pulled up a member of the audience and asked them to think of a number and write it down. He'd always suspected those acts to be pure bluffs and the members of the audience part of the act. But what Catherine Young had said had been terrifyingly the pure truth. She'd read him, nailed him like a butterfly to the board. Mac wasn't used to being seen, understood. He was used to being obeyed. The men under him in Ghost Ops knew damn all about him, and that was the way he liked it. The only person to have a slight insight into him had been Lucius, and already that had made him uncomfortable. Even now, even in exile, Nick and John and the rest of the small community they seemed to be building knew him as a tough, strong leader with no chinks in his armor, nothing there to hang on to but a big, hard, shiny surface. So being understood like that, it was scary. Even scarier was that he liked it, for that short burst of time in which she touched him, before his head could catch up to what she was doing. It had been like a shot of heroin to his system, and like any addict, now he craved it. He'd spent the night thinking of it, thinking of her, remembering that soft touch, the rush of warmth spreading in an instant from her hand to his entire body, zinging through his veins. She glowed while touching him, like some unearthly creature, as if there were a 1,000-watt lamp inside her, beaming light and warmth. In that instant, she'd been impossibly beautiful, the most beautiful woman in the world, some enchantress from another planet, too delicate and beautiful for this one. That hadn't lasted. When she'd broken the connection, it was as if something had broken inside her. That pale skin no longer glowing, but ashen, shadows under those beautiful eyes, nostrils pinched and pale. That had kept him awake too, because the glowing fairy princess from planet Zog had been fascinating, but the vulnerable, fragile woman who'd sprinkled fairy dust over him and paid a price for it nearly broke his heart. He'd had to fist his hands to keep from putting his arms around her. He, McEnroe, balls-to-the-wall tough guy, who could and had watched enemies die by his hand without blinking, had been about to put his arms around a potential enemy, a completely unknown entity who had somehow found them in their hideout, someone who could put his community in jeopardy. "Okay," he said, putting on his war face, making his voice cool. "I'm going to see what else I can get out of her." Nick gave a curt nod, turned away, and picked up the hawk again. John grinned and made kissy noises. Mac flipped him the bird and walked out.